final song George Harrison gifted to the Beatles was written out of frustration, yet ended up as being one of their most popular and uplifting songs. It's the start of 1969, and George is indeed experiencing a long, cold, lonely winter of discontent. His wife Patty had temporarily left their home, and George himself had temporarily left the Beatles. The British winter was especially cold, with sub-zero temperatures making George's Friar Park mansion even chillier than usual. When the first sunny day of spring arrives in April, George skies off from yet another round of boring business meetings in Apple and elects to drive down to Surrey to visit his mate Eric at his Hurtwood estate.
We had meetings and meetings and all this, bankers and, lawyers and all sorts of things and contracts and shares. And it was really awful because it's not the sort of thing we enjoy. And one day I didn't come into the office. I just it was like sagging off school. And I went to a friend's house in the country and it was just sunny and it was all just the release of the tension that had been building up on me, and it was just really nice sunny day. And I picked up the guitar, which was the first time I'd played the guitar for a couple of weeks because I'd been so busy. And the first thing that came out was that song. It just came, and I finished it later when I was on holiday in Sardinia.
It was one of those beautiful spring mornings. I think it was April, and we were just walking around the garden with our guitars. And we walked around the garden. We sat down at the bottom of the garden, looking out over and the sun was shining, and it was a beautiful morning, and he started to sing. He started to sing "Here Comes the Sun," and the opening lines,
Work started in the studio on the 7th of July, with George's beautiful high-pitched melody leading the way throughout both the verses and the choruses, making his guitar sound strikingly bright, almost like a mandolin, mirroring the positive mood of the song. 13 takes follow that day, with Paul providing an almost restrained bass line. And Ringo on drums, who initially has trouble mastering the complex time changes in one section of the song, as heard in this early take.
He comes into me because he'd been to India again, I think. He said, "Oh, I've got this song, it's like 7.5 time." Yeah, so, he might as well have talked to me in Arabic, you know what I mean? And that's how I come off. I had to find some way that I could physically do it and do it every time so it came off on the time. That's one of those Indian tricks. I had no way of going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's not my brain. So as long as I go, okay, that's 7, good, got it.
The following day, George lays down his lead vocal, with Paul assisting on double-tracked harmony vocals.
Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes.
John is absent, recovering from a recent car accident in the Scottish Highlands with Yoko and their respective children, Julian and Kyoko. Naturally, the wrecked Austin Maxi car was later displayed in their garden as an artwork. John possibly made a contribution to Here Comes the Sun, At the Twickenham rehearsals on the 2nd of January, John plays a snatch of Sun King and can be heard possibly singing Here Comes the Sun in this lo-fi recording. A week later, George is back in the studio and, inspired by Indian music, overdubs some hand claps. George certainly goes all in on the production, returning again in August, demonstrating his painstaking attention to detail on Here Comes the Sun. He borrows a Beatles trick of running his lead guitar through a rotating Leslie speaker for added texture. George had experimented with this technique on Badge, a song which he co-wrote with Eric Clapton a few months earlier for Cream. George even wrote on the lyric sheet for Here Comes the Sun that the middle was to be played as the Son of Badge. George had rarely used orchestral arrangements to augment his songs, but as with Something, he turned late on to George Martin, who provided a superb score for strings and woodwind. However, George still wasn't entirely happy and added one final secret ingredient. George was one of the first UK owners of the Moog 3P, the first commercially available electronic synthesizer. He used it a few months earlier on his experimental solo album, Electronic Sound. With only days before Abbey Road was due to be finally mixed, George added the Moog. The Beatles were often blessed by happy accidents. Think of the unintentional feedback on I Feel Fine, which was later replicated and added to the intro. With Here Comes the Sun, the Moog developed a fault whereby it lost its sustain and glided down to the lowest note. The last day the song was mixed was the 20th of August. Fittingly, it was the peak of summer, and also the last time that all four Beatles were together in a recording studio. Despite the Beatles' catalogue being dominated by the songwriting of Lennon and McCartney, it is this song of George which is endured the most. With approaching 2 billion streams on Spotify, Here Comes the Sun is easily the Beatles' most streamed song, achieving more than double that of the next best. Finally, after a long battle to get his songs on a Beatles album, George did indeed get his place in the sun and helped to secure the Beatles' long-lasting legacy.